currently, there isn't really a great way to take out the suprarenal fixation. Most surgeons, I think, including myself, use a cut syringe. So you take a syringe and you cut the end off with a scalpel or a bovie. I've always been worried about cutting myself when I do that. That's always been my challenge with that. And then the edges of the syringe are pretty rough. So as you're trying to slide that up the aorta to reconstrain the stent, it can cause damage to the aorta, or it can just not slide smoothly. And the second method is to simply cut the barbs of cut the struts of the stent and leave the stent in place. And in situations of infection, I don't love that idea because if it's infected, you'd like to remove all the foreign material if possible. My challenge with the wire cutter has always been that it's thick, it's a blunt, it's a short jaws, so you can't always see where the tips of it are as you're cutting the wire. And then when you cut the wire, the edges of that wire are not smooth. And so then you're sewing in anastomosis right up against all of these sharp metal edges. And my thought, although this is somewhat theoretical, but my thought has always been those rough edges of wire could, over time, as they're pulsating against the anastomosis, just fray the proline and cause a pseudoaneurysm or, bleeding. We just needed a better way to do this. And so you and I started talking about what it would need to look like and how it would need to function. But I just really felt like that was a problem that needed to be solved. You got back to me several weeks later and you're like, well, I just haven't been able to sleep. And I've been thinking about this. And I went to my basement and I cobbled together this thing. And I thought, oh my gosh, I would never do that in a million years. I would never be down in my basement trying to create, this device. So I'm really grateful that you brought that piece of it to it. But with that back and forth, just going through several iterations of what things needed to look like, every step of the way just felt like we were getting closer. And for me, it was just about meeting a need. And I really felt like the current methods that we have in vascular surgery to take this device out are not great. And so it was really just about meeting a need to help vascular surgeons, because honestly, taking out a stent graft's already a tough operation. The patient may or may not be the healthiest. So you really want to make sure it goes as smoothly as possible. So it felt like a fairly straightforward device could really make this operation much safer. Being able to safely remove that proximal stent is one of the key portions of the procedure in my mind. And creating injury in that visceral area of the aorta is really problematic to fix. It's not an easy area to get to. It's what I call high-priced real estate. There's a lot there that's very important. So we want to be able to do this safely and effectively, and also quickly if possible, because your proximal cross-clamp time needs to be short. And we do know that the shorter the proximal cross-clamp time, the better the patients do. And so my hope would be that if we're able to remove these grafts efficiently and safely, we can reduce our proximal cross-clamp time. I don't know that leaving rough cut edges of stent behind is ideal. And certainly cutting the syringe, although it works, it's definitely not an ideal solution. So I think we have room for improvement. Whether that will translate to improved patient care, my hope is that it would, and sort of intuitively seems like it should. But certainly having that step of the operation go more smoothly is an important piece of having a successful operation. I just remember being kind of amazed, really, at how easy the graft came out. I mean, I literally turned around and said, wow. It was pretty amazing that it just came out so easily. It made that step so smooth, whereas before that was always a challenging technical point for me. It really made it easy. The other surgeons that used it in that time frame also have been really positive about it. And honestly, both of them have told me, we need to get this on the market. We need to be able to buy this. This is critical to have for people who are taking these grafts out. So I've gotten nothing but universally good feedback on the device. And I'm really excited to be able to bring it to market and have people get it in surgeons' hands. Getting the XgraftR placed right at that portion of the aorta that you are going to use as your proximal anastomosis. So the very infrarenal portion of the aorta, getting it there and then sort of slowly sliding it up keeping the angle so that the proximal portion of the XgrafTR is in parallel with the aorta. And that's why the XgraftR is curved, so that you can more ergonomically do that to keep the proximal end of it in line with the aorta, and just sort of slowly feeding that up. But we started out with a straight tube, and then we started out with this portion of the device solid. And in testing that, ex vivo, there was a lot of friction to it. And so removing the center portion really decreased the friction and was as good at reconstraining the proximal stent. And then the other piece was creating a bit of a bend to it so that ergonomically, as you're reaching in as the surgeon, you can allow this proximal portion to follow the line of the aorta easily because, of course, you're down in the abdomen. And so having it angled was another piece that we had to change. And I think those things have really allowed the device to be optimized. You also, if you have to, can reverse it. You can take it out. And having this middle portion empty sort of helps facilitate that as you, first of all, as you grab the limbs through here to pull them through, but also if you have to reverse it. So it's those kind of changes, which I think if you're not a surgeon who does these, you wouldn't necessarily think of those things. I think that's how that collaboration was really helpful. I simply would say that even if you're comfortable cutting the syringe or having another way of removing these, it would be a reasonable thing to try this device because it really is an advance. Because it's so simple, it actually advances things quite a lot. It makes this step much easier. And so even if you're comfortable, because we've had 25 years of taking these things out without this device, even if you're comfortable with these other techniques, it would be reasonable to try this and see what you think, because in my opinion, it's made things much easier.